It's called Sarajevo Roses. When a mortar explodes in the street, it leaves a unique pattern on the ground. The concrete scars look like pressed flowers. We call them Sarajevo roses. A fresh bouquet was left for us this morning. I stepped around them when I came back from the Holiday Inn, where we go to make a few phone calls or pick up and send faxes to various friends. These days, this is our only form of communication with anyone outside the city. In the relative protection of our underground cafe, I share a letter sent to us from our friends on the enemy side, those who maintain B-92, Radio Free Beograd. They write that the snipers in the hills surrounding our beautiful city of collapse and ruin get paid per target, extra for children. One sniper who was interviewed by a French reporter and then rebroadcast on B-92 told of how he relished seeing the expression on a mother's face when her daughter, standing next to her, is shot. It's important, though, to be proud of one's work, to hold to one's convictions, even in the face of disputes to the contrary. And even in these troubling and difficult times, it is somehow reassuring to know that there is job security in Sarajevan snipering. There's so many of us who remain here to be the intended targets in circus games. We stay and continue our rounds of Bosnian roulette in our attempts to get water from the only remaining spigot in the city. Occasionally, though, due to boredom steeped in repetition, we set up other contests to pass the time competing with these snipers in the hills. There's one street corner in particular that is a favorite arcade for these sharpshooters. Anyone crossing the river and coming into town on a trek for water or trying to sneak out of the city before this tournament is over has to pass this crossroad. It's quite a rewarding sight for the proud snipers who get paid per head, and extra for the kids. It was Plowman's idea, really, though he'd never admit to it. He's a haggard old grump that likes to claim he doesn't care about anyone or anything anymore. Plowman's older than the rest of us. He's like a grandfather who's wise and sharp and funny. He used to always have dirt under his fingernails from digging in the flower bed on the rooftop of his apartment. He was born in Belgrade, but he's lived in Sarajevo since he was 14 or 15. He's over 70 now. He's a landscape of creased flesh and dark eyes, and he smiles with yellowed teeth between missing gaps. He's lost almost everything he's ever held dear: his children, his wife, friends, his city, yet he has never ceased to counsel with the better angels of his nature. He'd been collecting linens for weeks now, and to some, it may look cold and peculiar for this old man to go sorting through the rubble of someone's bombed-out home and walk away with their bed sheets. But since, from most vantage points, Plowman is a crazy old man, no one says anything to the contrary. In an insane situation, it is perfectly natural to display behavior that would, at other times, be considered deranged. Besides that, say those who knew him from that distant utopian time of before this siege, Plowman had been to the United States, as if that alone explained something fundamental about him. 25 and some years ago, Plowman went on holiday to the U.S. He traveled to a fabled land called California and returned with fantastic tales of music and girls and drugs. Certainly he brought back evidence of incredible music, miscellaneous LP records, and to some, his odd behavior gave credence to stories of rampant drug parties. But his exotic telling of seductive women had to be taken completely on faith, as we had no proof. Plowman, you see, wanted to be a beatnik, and in communist Yugoslavia, he was about as close as anyone had ever come to a poetic bohemian. He collected bed sheets for a specific purpose, and he encouraged others to do the same. "Bring them down to the cafe," he told everyone, and then from a former candle shop next door, he scavenged an assortment of dyes. The buckets for his surreptitious plan were plentiful. Empty containers lay everywhere. The difficulty was in finding those without bullet holes. When he had enough bed sheets, Plowman asked as many people as possible to come and help, and we were a little surprised at how many actually showed up at our cafe. Each were hauling a hesitant smile and a head full of curiosity. Then, in the darkness of this urban war zone, that old self-proclaimed hippie graced everyone with a night of joyful diversion, as several dozen of us spent all night tie-dyeing bed sheets. In the last hours before dawn, we dyed 20, maybe 30 sheets in an incredible array of colors, And even though most of them were still wet, we tied them together to make 2 huge quilts. They looked like a motley flag from some tattered nation. Plowman pulled a few of us aside and told us that we had to take the tapestries to the top floor of a building on the corner of Kulovichev Street. Climbing the stairs, we gasped for breath under the weight of this damp linen, for none of us are as fit as we used to be back when we could eat every day. And I almost wanted to curse Plowman for having us make this climb, but when we arrived at the top floor and looked out through the fragmented glass remaining in window openings, we saw what he had intended all along. Plowman had been there previously and strung cable from one building to another. It turned out that in the bygone days, long before the siege, he worked for the television station as an antenna installer. He still had tools and metal cables from his job. Plowman had rigged a pulley in one building and an anchor in the one across the street. There was a double line of cable that ran between them. Tying the bed sheets to the coiled metal wire, we pulled them out the window until they hung between the buildings, bright-colored sails 30 meters high, blinding the view from the hills of the pedestrian walkway below, thus reducing the sniper's profit margin to nothing. The centerpiece of the quilt blinder was an old souvenir from Plowman's journey in the mythic 60s to that fairy tale land known as San Francisco. It was a red, white, and blue tapestry of a skull with a lightning bolt across its cranium, an emblem of the Grateful Dead. He told us the icon is called Steal Your Face. We laughed ourselves to tears. I do not know if the dead in Sarajevo are grateful or not, but at least they no longer suffer these redundant funerary games of hunger and sniper and landmines. As for the living, well, we walked across Kulovichev Street in the calming shadow and temporary protection of a bedsheet tapestry at a leisurely pace and with timid mirth, offering evidence of living gratitude. Plowman was no longer around to see it. He lingered too long on an early morning water run and lost today's game of Bosnian roulette. But we joked that since he was an old man, the sniper didn't get paid very much. Each spring in years past, Plowman planted flowers in his tiny rooftop garden. Roses were always his favorite. And I think it's important to look at places that aren't your own and try to put yourself in somebody else's position sometimes, because I think through doing that we come to an understanding. We build bridges like Ivo Andrić's bridge on the Drina. I think that bridges are a great way to cross a river, but I think they also have a deep symbology of linking people together rather than just taking somebody else's word for somewhere that you've never been. So that's why I'm here. I'm interested in different people's stories, and without putting my own judgment or opinions upon it, I want to hear from individuals what they think, what they feel, and I think that's important for everyone to look at in themselves. Whatever you've experienced is only yours, and nobody else has done that before. I guess that's about it. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear them and then hear what you have to say.
I have a question.
All right.
What if a group experiences the same thing as you did?
Well, even in that same group, like I talked about going down to the Danube. I went down to the Danube out in Bela Crkva last week, and there were 5 of us. And I'm from the U.S. This other guy was born in Bosnia, but has lived all his life there. This other lady was in her 60s. Somebody else has lived there all his life. And all of us saw the same river. We had a group experience, but we each saw something else in that river. This one guy was saying, "This is an ugly river. I hate I hate this land. It's so trashed and all that." I saw, part of the Danube I hadn't seen before. So even in a group experience, there's individual perceptions in there, because not everybody has. In reader response theory, your response to a story is not the same as somebody else's, and it's a group experience. You're all reading the same story, but you aren't going to talk about it in the same way. And each unique perception is yours. I mean, there's only so many stories in the world that are told. The movie Star Wars is just an old Western, and the old Westerns are just old Greek tragedies. So, but we tend to like these over and over again if they're told well enough. I think it was Dostoevsky said there's only two stories in the world. Somebody goes on a journey and a stranger comes to town. And really, that's the same story because the stranger is that person on the journey. The person who goes on a journey goes to some town somewhere. So really, there's one story. And in 6,000 years of written human history, how many books have been written? And yet there's really just one story. And that's my story. I'm a person on a journey looking to experience stuff. But to the person in Bella Cirqua that I went to visit, I was a stranger coming to town. And so there really isn't a collective group experience that everybody sees the same thing.